Recession shapes or recovery shapes are used by economists to describe different types of recessions and their subsequent recoveries. There is no specific academic theory or classification system for recession shapes. Rather, the terminology is used as an informal shorthand to characterize recessions and their recoveries. The most commonly used terms are V-shaped. The names derive from the shape the economic data, particularly GDP, takes during the recession. And recovery. In a V-shaped recession, the economy suffers a sharp but brief period of economic decline with a clearly defined trough, followed by a strong recovery. V-shapes are the normal shape for a recession, as the strength of the economic recovery is typically closely related to the severity of the preceding recession. An example of a V-shaped recession is the recession of 1953 in the United States. In the early 1950s, the economy in the United States was growing, but because the Federal Reserve expected inflation, it raised interest rates, tipping the economy into recession. In 1953, growth began to slow in the third quarter and the economy shrank by 2.4%. In the fourth quarter, the economy shrank by 6.2%. And in the first quarter of 1954, it shrank by 2% before returning to growth. By the fourth quarter of 1954, the economy was growing at an 8% pace, well above the trend. Thus, GDP growth for this recession formed a V-shape. During the 2020 recession caused by the coronavirus pandemic, where the left side of the V was particularly severe, some commentators expected that the recovery might not follow a full V shape, but would look more like a square root shape, or a Nike swoosh shape. By August 2020, the Federal Reserve was expecting a bumpy Nike swoosh recovery. A U-shaped recession is longer than a V-shaped recession and has a less clearly defined trough. GDP may shrink for several quarters, and only slowly return to trend growth. Simon Johnson, former chief economist for the International Monetary Fund, says a U-shaped recession is like a bathtub. You go in, you stay in. The sides are slippery. You know, maybe there's some bumpy stuff in the bottom, but you don't come out of the bathtub for a long time. The 1973-75 recession in the United States can be considered a U-shaped recession. In early 1973, the economy began to shrink and continued to decline or have very low growth for nearly 2 years. After bumping along the bottom, the economy climbed back to recovery in 1975. In a W-shaped recession, the economy falls into recession, recovers with a short period of growth, then falls back into recession before finally recovering, giving a down-up pattern resembling the letter W. The early 1980s recession in the United States is cited as an example of a W-shaped recession. The National Bureau of Economic Research considers 2 recessions to have occurred in the early 1980s. The economy fell into recession from January 1980 to July 1980, shrinking at an 8% annual rate from April to June 1980. The economy then entered a quick period of growth, and in the first 3 months of 1981 grew at an 8.4% annual rate, as the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker raised interest rates to fight inflation. The economy dipped back into recession from July 1981 to November 1982. The economy then entered a period of mostly robust growth for the rest of the decade. The European debt crisis in the early 2010s is a more recent example of a W-shaped recession. A combination of government austerity, falling business investment, rising interest rates, global economic weakness, high energy prices, and weak consumer spending after the Great Recession of 2008-2009 tipped many Eurozone countries into a second recession from 2011 to 2013. Countries affected included Italy, Spain, Portugal, France, Ireland, Germany and Cyprus. Greece, while part of the Eurozone, saw continuous economic contraction from 2007 to 2015, and thus does not fit the definition of a W-shaped recession, but rather an L-shaped recession. The United Kingdom is not a member of the Eurozone, but was a member of the European Union until 2020, and suffered a minor W-shaped recession when GDP contracted in Q4 2011 and Q1 2012. An L-shaped recession or depression occurs when an economy has a severe recession and does not return to trend line growth for many years. If ever, the steep drop or degrowth is followed by a flat line makes the shape of an L. This is the most severe of the different shapes of recession. Alternative terms for long periods of underperformance include depression and lost decade. Compare also malaise. A classic example of an L-shaped recession occurred in Japan following the bursting of the Japanese asset price bubble in 1990. From the end of World War II throughout the 1980s, Japan's economy was growing robustly. In the late 1980s, a massive asset price bubble developed in Japan. After the bubble burst, the economy suffered Fr.